Hello and welcome aboard to the Snoozy Voyager. Imagine waking up one morning to find that your entire city has vanished. Not destroyed, not abandoned, just buried. Buried under snowdrifts taller than houses, wind howling like the end of the world, and temperatures so cold that simply stepping outside could kill you within minutes. Now imagine you're in New York City, the bustling heart of America, with elevated trains frozen mid-track, horses collapsing dead in the streets, and people trapped in buildings for days with nothing but stale bread and terror for company. Welcome to March 1888, when Mother Nature decided to remind humanity exactly who's in charge. For 3 days, the most powerful city in America became a frozen wasteland, and when it was over, 400 people were dead, thousands were trapped, and the entire nation realized that progress and civilization mean absolutely nothing when the weather decides to murder you. This wasn't some frontier town or rural outpost. This was New York City, with its telegraph wires, its elevated railways, its modern buildings and sophisticated infrastructure. And none of it mattered. The blizzard didn't care about your stock portfolio or your important business meeting. It buried everything equally, the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, all of them shivering in the dark, wondering if they'd live to see spring. But before we venture into the storm, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight, so I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Let us travel back to a time when weather forecasting consisted of looking at the sky and guessing when a 3-day storm could shut down an entire metropolis, and when surviving winter meant more than just cranking up the thermostat. So what was it really like to live through the Great Blizzard of 1888? How did people survive when their city became an Arctic wasteland overnight? What did they eat when food couldn't be delivered? How did they stay warm when cold couldn't reach their homes? What happened to the thousands trapped in buildings, in trains, in the streets? Tonight we'll explore the chaos of a city paralyzed, the desperate struggle to survive nature's fury, and the strange, darkly comic absurdity of watching modern civilization completely collapse because of some frozen water falling from the sky. This is a story of incredible human resilience and bureaucratic incompetence. It's also a story of people discovering that all their technology and progress meant nothing against a sufficiently angry sky. Congratulations, you've just woken up on March 12th, 1888, and you have absolutely no idea what's about to hit you. You wake up on March 11th, 1888, and it's actually pleasant. Unseasonably warm even. Temperatures in the 40s, which after a brutal winter feels like a gift from God. You're planning your week, maybe thinking about that new spring coat you've been eyeing in the shop windows. The sky looks a bit grey, sure, but nothing particularly threatening. The weather forecast in the newspaper, which is about as reliable as asking your cat's opinion, mentions possible rain. Rain. Not biblical apocalypse, just rain. This is important because in about 18 hours, you're going to be questioning every life decision that led you to live in this godforsaken city. The thing is, you have no reason to suspect what's coming. March in New York is temperamental. Everyone knows that. One day it's winter, the next day spring teases you with warmth, then winter comes back for an encore performance. This is normal. This is expected. You've lived through plenty of New York marches and survived them all with nothing more than a head cold and mild irritation. So when you see those grey clouds rolling in, when you feel that slight shift in the wind, you think nothing of it. Maybe you grab an umbrella. Maybe you don't. Either way, you're certainly not preparing for the meteorological equivalent of a surprise attack. Your neighbours are equally unconcerned. People are going about their normal Sunday activities. church services are well attended, families are taking walks, enjoying the mild weather while it lasts. Street vendors are selling their goods. Horse-drawn carriages are clip-clopping along the cobblestones. Everything is perfectly, wonderfully, deceivingly normal. There's something almost cruel about it. This last moment of routine before everything goes sideways. It's like the weather is lulling everyone into a false sense of security before pulling the rug out from under the entire city. The meteorologists at the Weather Bureau are looking at their instruments and seeing conflicting signals. There's a low-pressure system moving up from the south. There's another system coming down from Canada. When these two systems meet, things could get interesting. But how interesting? That's the question they can't answer with any certainty. Their forecasting tools are primitive by modern standards. They're basically educated guesses with barometers. So they issue a vague warning about possible rain or snow, figuring that covers all their bases. It's the Victorian equivalent of shrugging and saying weather's gonna weather. Here's what nobody realises, including the Weather Bureau. Those two systems are about to collide with the force of meteorological titans battling for supremacy. The warm, moist air from the south is going to crash into the Arctic blast from Canada, and the result will be a storm so powerful, so perfectly terrible in its combination of snow, wind and cold, that it will shut down the entire eastern seaboard. But that's tomorrow's problem. Today, you're enjoying the warm weather and making plans that assume tomorrow will be just another day. By evening on March 11th, the temperature is still reasonable. You go to bed with no concerns beyond the usual urban anxieties, work tomorrow, bills to pay, that annoying neighbour who makes too much noise. You certainly don't go to bed thinking I should stockpile food and fuel because I might not be able to leave my house for 3 days. Why would you? This is New York City, the most modern, most advanced city in America. What could possibly go wrong? Spoiler alert, everything. Absolutely everything is about to go wrong. It starts snowing around midnight. Light flakes, nothing dramatic. You're probably asleep, completely unaware that the atmosphere is currently organising the meteorological equivalent of a sneak attack. By early morning on March 12th, the snow is falling harder, but still people aren't worried. New Yorkers have seen snow before. They're not delicate flowers who panic at the first sight of winter weather. So they do what any sensible Victorian would do. They get dressed, have their breakfast, and head out into what will become one of the worst storms in American history. This is the last moment anyone in the city feels truly in control of their circumstances. When you wake up and look out your window, you see snow, not a blizzard, just snow. Maybe 3 or 4 inches have accumulated overnight. It's March 12th. Snow in mid-March isn't unusual. You've seen this before. Your first thought probably isn't, I should barricade myself indoors and prepare for survival. Your first thought is probably something like, I'll need to wear my heavier coat. This is reasonable. This is logical. This is also catastrophically wrong, but you don't know that yet. The snow is falling steadily now. Not dramatically, but consistently. The wind is starting to pick up, but it's not yet the howling monster it will become. You eat your breakfast, maybe eggs and toast, maybe porridge, whatever your usual morning meal is, and you think about your day. You have work to get to, or shopping to do, or social calls to make. You're a busy person with responsibilities. A little snow isn't going to stop you. This is the attitude of basically everyone in the city right now. Everyone is making the same calculation. This is annoying but manageable. Dress warmly, leave a bit early, you'll be fine. The newspapers that managed to print before the storm got too bad are still calling for rain or snow. Nothing apocalyptic. There's no emergency warning. No suggestion that people should stay home. How could there be? The Weather Bureau doesn't realise what's happening either. They're seeing the snow, sure, but they don't yet understand that this is just the opening act. The real show, the catastrophic wind, the plummeting temperatures, the snow that won't stop for 3 days, that's all still building. It's like watching the first few minutes of a horror movie when everything seems fine and you're wondering when the scary part starts. The scary part is coming. It's coming fast. Here's what's happening in the atmosphere right now, though nobody on the ground understands it. That warm southern system has collided with the Arctic blast from Canada. The temperature difference between these two air masses is enormous, and that difference is creating energy. Lots of energy. The kind of energy that generates monster storms. The snow you're seeing is just moisture being wrung out of the atmosphere as warm air rises and cold air sinks. The wind is the atmosphere trying to equalize the pressure difference between these two systems, and it's going to get worse. So much worse. By mid-morning, reality is starting to dawn on some people. The snow is falling harder. The wind is picking up significantly. Visibility is dropping. People who left early for work are starting to struggle. The horse-drawn streetcars are slowing down, their progress impeded by accumulating snow. The elevated trains are running, but their schedules are getting disrupted. Still, most people are committed now. They've left home. They're partway to their destination. Turning back seems silly. They push forward, convinced they can make it, convinced this is just a bad snow day, and not the beginning of a 3-day nightmare. It's the sunk cost fallacy in action. You've already invested time and effort in getting this far, so you keep going even though conditions are deteriorating. This decision will trap thousands of people away from home when the storm really hits. Congratulations, you've decided to go to work like a responsible citizen. This decision will haunt you for the rest of your life, assuming you survive the day. The elevated trains are still running, sort of. The horse-drawn streetcars are attempting their routes. Everyone's squinting against the wind, which is now blowing snow horizontally, with enough force to strip paint. You're dressed for March weather, not for the Arctic, because nobody told you to prepare for the Arctic. Your wool coat, which seemed perfectly adequate this morning, is now about as useful as wearing a bedsheet. And the temperature? It's dropping fast from the 40s down into the teens, with wind chills that would make a polar bear reconsider its life choices. The walk to the train station, which usually takes 15 minutes, is taking 30, then 45. The sidewalks are disappearing under snow. The wind is pushing you backward, sideways, anywhere except the direction you want to go. Your face is getting numb. Your fingers are losing feeling even inside your gloves. Other commuters are struggling alongside you, everyone bent forward, everyone fighting the same battle. Nobody's talking. There's no breath to spare for conversation. You're all just trying to move forward through what has become a hostile, alien environment. The city you know is disappearing into white chaos. You finally reach the elevated train platform and climb the stairs, which are already accumulating ice. The platform is crowded with people who had the same idea. Get to work, maintain normalcy, pretend this isn't as bad as it clearly is. Everyone's stamping their feet trying to maintain circulation. Everyone's looking down the tracks for the train, and looking, and looking. The schedule is completely meaningless now. Trains that should arrive every 10 minutes are taking 30 minutes, 45, not coming at all. Some trains pass your station without stopping because they're too full. Others stop but are so packed with humanity that you couldn't possibly squeeze in. It's like trying to board a sardine can that's already overfull of sardines. When a train finally stops with room, you pile on with dozens of others. The car is freezing. There's no heat. Ice is forming on the windows. Everyone's pressed together, which at least provides some warmth, but also means you're breathing the same stale air as 100 other cold, wet, increasingly anxious people. The train lurches forward, then stops, lurches again, stops for longer. The wind is so strong that the entire elevated structure is swaying. You can feel it moving beneath you, which is absolutely not something you want to feel when you're suspended 3 stories above the street in a metal box. Through the ice-covered windows you can barely see anything. The world has become white nothingness. The train makes it another few blocks, then stops, and doesn't start again. The power has failed, killed by ice on the third rail. You're stuck. The car is getting colder by the minute. Nobody knows if another train will come to push you to the next station. Nobody knows if rescue will arrive. Nobody knows anything except that they're trapped in a metal refrigerator that's swaying in hurricane-force winds above a city that's disappearing under snow. Some passengers decide to wait it out. Others attempt to climb down and make it the rest of the way on foot. This is not a good decision. The storm outside is worse than anyone imagined, and several of these brave or desperate souls will be found frozen to death in snowdrifts within sight of their destination. You're starting to realise something important. Going to work today was a terrible idea. You should have stayed home. You should have looked at the snow and the wind and decided that no job is worth dying for. But you didn't, because you're a responsible person who doesn't skip work for a little snow. And now you're trapped in a disabled train car getting colder by the minute, wondering if anyone even knows you're here. This is what it means to be caught off guard by nature. This is what it means to underestimate weather. This is what it feels like when modern civilization's infrastructure collapses and you're left alone, with the reality that humans are actually quite fragile when the environment turns hostile. The elevated railway system, that marvel of modern engineering that New Yorkers are so proud of, is currently becoming the world's most expensive frozen artwork. The trains are trying to run, bless their mechanical hearts, but ice is forming on the tracks faster than they can move. The third rail, which powers the electric trains, is encased in ice. Some trains are getting stuck between stations, leaving passengers trapped in metal boxes suspended above the street. Others are simply abandoning their routes because the conductors can't see through the snow. Below, on the streets, people are starting to realise this might be more than a typical March snowstorm. This is the moment optimism begins its slow, freezing death. The elevated trains were supposed to be the solution to New York's transportation problems. No more traffic jams with horse-drawn vehicles. No more being stuck behind a slow-moving wagon. The elevated system was fast, efficient, modern. It was progress incarnate, steel rails lifted above the messy reality of street-level life. Passengers could glide above the city, watching the urban landscape pass. Beneath them, arriving at their destinations quickly and comfortably. That was the promise. Today, that promise is being broken in the most dramatic way possible. The elevated system isn't solving transportation problems, it's creating death traps. The ice accumulation is extraordinary. Every surface is coated in a layer of ice that's growing thicker by the hour. The metal rails, the wooden platforms, the iron support structures, everything is becoming a frozen sculpture. The trains that are still attempting to run are slipping on the icy rails. The electric third rail, which provides power to the motors, is particularly problematic. Ice is an insulator. When ice covers the third rail, the connection between rail and train is broken. No connection means no power. No power means the train stops moving. And when the train stops moving while suspended 3 stories above a street in a blizzard, you've got a serious problem. Conductors are making life or death decisions in real time. Do you try to push forward, hoping you can make it to the next station? Do you back up and return to the previous station? Do you just stop where you are and hope rescue comes before your passengers freeze to death? There's no good answer. Some conductors make heroic efforts, manually chipping ice off the third rail, trying to restore power. Others simply abandon their trains, leaving passengers to fend for themselves. It's not cowardice, it's survival instinct kicking in when you realise the situation is hopeless, and staying might mean dying. The passengers trapped between stations are experiencing a special kind of hell. They can see buildings, they can see streets, they can see the city continuing on below them, muffled by snow but still there, still real. They're so close to ground level, maybe 30 feet, but it might as well be a mile. The drop is too far to jump. The support structure is too icy to climb. Some passengers attempt it anyway, desperation overcoming caution. They climb out of train cars onto icy platforms, try to descend the iron support columns, and discover that climbing down slippery metal in hurricane-force winds while wearing Victorian clothing is essentially impossible. A few make it. Most don't. Several fall and are injured or killed. Others make it partway down, realise they can't continue and can't climb back up. They're stuck, clinging to frozen metal, exposed to the full force of the storm, slowly freezing to death while other passengers watch helplessly from the relative warmth of the train cars. By afternoon, the elevated train system is essentially shut down. The few trains still running are moving at walking speed, if they're moving at all. The platforms are deserted except for desperate people waiting for rescue that isn't coming. The magnificent infrastructure that was supposed to represent progress and modernity has been defeated by frozen water falling from the sky. It's almost embarrassing, all this engineering, all this investment, all this proud human achievement, and it can't handle a snowstorm. The elevated trains will eventually recover, but for now they're monuments to human hubris. They're proof that technology isn't magic, that infrastructure can fail, and that nature doesn't care how modern you think you are. Let's talk about wind. Not the gentle breeze that rustles your newspaper. Not even the strong gust that messes up your hair. We're talking about wind that hits 50 miles per hour with gusts approaching 80. Wind that picks up grown men and throws them into snowdrifts. Wind that turns snowflakes into tiny frozen projectiles that feel like being sandblasted. You can't walk straight in this wind. You can't see in this wind. You certainly can't breathe normally in this wind because every breath fills your lungs with snow and cold that makes you feel like you're drowning. This wind is rewriting the definition of unpleasant weather conditions. The wind isn't constant. That would almost be better. Instead, it comes in waves, in gusts that hit with physical force. You're struggling forward, making slow progress, and then a gust slams into you like a fist. You're knocked sideways, stumble, maybe fall completely. Getting back up is an ordeal. Your clothes are heavy with snow. Your limbs are getting stiff from cold. And you know another gust is coming, you just don't know when. It's like being in a fight where you can't see your opponent and you can't predict when the next punch will come. Exhausting doesn't begin to describe it. The wind is doing strange things to the snow. Instead of falling straight down and accumulating evenly, the snow is being sculpted into bizarre formations. Drifts pile up against buildings, growing taller and taller as the wind deposits snow in massive quantities. Some drifts reach second-story windows. Others completely bury ground floor entrances. Meanwhile, other areas are swept clean, the wind removing snow faster than it can accumulate. The city becomes a patchwork of impassable deep snow and exposed pavement, and you have no way of knowing which you'll encounter as you try to navigate streets that have become hostile, alien landscapes. The wind chill is brutal. The actual air temperature is in the teens, cold enough on its own, but the wind makes it feel much, much colder. Wind chill is a real physical phenomenon, not just a measurement to make weather seem worse. Wind strips away the thin layer of warm air your body generates around itself. Without that protective layer, your body loses heat rapidly. Exposed skin can get frostbite in minutes. Your core temperature drops. Hypothermia becomes a real threat, even though you're theoretically dressed for winter weather. Your wool coat and layers of Victorian clothing aren't enough. They can't keep up with the heat loss caused by this murderous wind. People are getting disoriented. The wind and snow create whiteout conditions where you can't see more than a few feet. Buildings disappear. Streets become unrecognisable. People get lost in neighbourhoods they've lived in for years because every landmark is hidden by snow, and visibility is essentially zero. You could walk right past your own house and never know it. You could be 3 feet from safety and die of exposure because you couldn't find the door. This is how the wind kills, not just through cold, but through confusion. It takes away your ability to navigate, to find shelter, to save yourself. It reduces you to a stumbling, freezing thing that's lost in familiar territory. The sound of the wind is constant and overwhelming. It howls around buildings, creating eerie harmonics. It rattles windows so hard people think they'll shatter. It finds every crack and gap in walls, whistling through with a sound like 1,000 angry ghosts. Inside buildings, you can hear it, feel it, and worry about it. Will the windows break? Will the walls hold? The buildings in New York are solid, but this wind is testing them in ways they weren't designed for. Some windows do break, letting snow and wind blast into previously safe interiors. Some chimneys collapse, crashing through roofs. The wind isn't just an annoyance, it's a destructive force that's attacking the entire city, testing every structure, finding every weakness, and exploiting it without mercy. All those telegraph wires crisscrossing the city like a spider's web, they're currently snapping like guitar strings. The weight of accumulated ice and snow, combined with that delightful wind we just discussed, is pulling down poles, snapping wires, and generally destroying the entire communication infrastructure of the city. By midday, New York is essentially cut off from the rest of the world. No telegrams in or out, no way to call for help, no way to check on loved ones in other cities, no way to know if this storm is hitting anywhere else, or if God has specifically chosen to punish New York for its sins. The silence is almost as unsettling as the storm itself. The telegraph was modern civilization's nervous system. It connected cities, allowed instant communication across vast distances, made commerce and news move at speeds previous generations couldn't imagine. Wall Street depended on the telegraph to coordinate with other financial centres. Newspapers depended on it for news from beyond the city. Families depended on it to stay in touch with distant relatives. The telegraph was so integrated into daily life that its existence was taken for granted. Nobody thought about what would happen if it failed. Why would they? The telegraph was reliable. The telegraph was modern. The telegraph was invincible, until it wasn't. The wires are heavy with ice. Each thin telegraph wire is now coated in a sleeve of ice several inches thick, multiplying its weight by 10 or 20 times. The poles, which were designed to hold the weight of wires, aren't designed to hold the weight of wires plus massive amounts of ice plus hurricane-force wind. Something has to give. Throughout the morning, telegraph poles begin snapping. The sound is sharp and loud like rifle shots echoing through the storm. Each snap means dozens of connections going dead, dozens of communication lines severed. The wires themselves, weighted with ice and whipped by wind, begin breaking. When a wire snaps, it doesn't just fall, it whips through the air like a frozen tentacle, sometimes striking buildings or unfortunate people who happen to be nearby. The accumulating damage is catastrophic. By early afternoon, over 300 miles of telegraph wire are down in New York alone. That's not 300 wires, that's 300 miles of total wire. The web of communication that connected the city to itself and to the world has been shredded. Telegraph operators sit at their instruments, tapping out messages that go nowhere. The lines are dead. All of them. Every connection to Philadelphia, to Boston, to Washington, to Chicago, severed. New York is an island now, cut off as effectively as if the ocean had risen to surround it. Nobody knows what's happening beyond the city limits. Nobody knows if the storm extends across the entire East Coast, or if it's a localized phenomenon. The silence where information should be is deafening. For businesses, this is disaster within a disaster. Stock markets can't coordinate. Banks can't verify transactions. Shipping companies can't communicate with their vessels. News organisations can't receive stories from their correspondents. The entire apparatus of modern commerce grinds to a halt. In 1888, if you can't send a telegram, you essentially can't do business. You're reduced to whatever resources and information you have locally. Everything beyond your immediate physical reach might as well not exist. This is what isolation meant in the age of the telegraph, not being truly alone, but being cut off from the flow of information that modern life depends on. For individuals, the communication blackout is psychologically devastating. You have family in other cities. Are they safe? You don't know. You can't know. Your daughter was supposed to arrive by train from Philadelphia yesterday. Did she make it? Is she trapped somewhere? Is she even alive? You have no way to find out. You can write a letter, but mail isn't moving either. You could try to travel there personally, but travel is impossible. All you can do is wait and worry, and imagine worst-case scenarios that you have no way to verify or disprove. This is the cost of communication failure. Not just business disruption, but personal anguish. The torture of not knowing what's happened to the people you care about. The city government can't coordinate its response to the disaster. Police stations can't communicate with headquarters. Fire departments can't coordinate between houses. City offices can't share information or organize relief efforts. Everyone's operating independently, making decisions based on whatever information they have locally, with no way to coordinate with anyone else. It's chaos. Inefficient, duplicative chaos where some areas get too much attention and others get none, simply because there's no way to organize a coherent response. Modern infrastructure requires communication to function. Without it, you're reduced to isolated pockets of people making local decisions without any broader coordination. The city becomes 1,000 separate villages, each one struggling alone. New York's primary mode of transportation in 1888 isn't cars or trains, it's horses. Thousands and thousands of horses pulling cabs, delivery wagons, streetcars, everything. These horses are now dying. Not metaphorically, literally dying, collapsing in the streets from exhaustion, cold, and the sheer impossibility of walking through snowdrifts taller than they are. Some freeze to death where they fall. Others are abandoned by their drivers, who realize the animals can't go any farther and flee on foot. By the end of the storm, there will be hundreds of dead horses scattered throughout the city, frozen solid, waiting to be dealt with once the snow melts. It's grim, it's medieval, and it's happening in America's most modern city. Horses aren't machines. They're living creatures that get tired, cold, and frightened. They need food, water, and rest. In the chaos of the blizzard, they're getting none of these things. They're being driven through conditions that would kill a person, pulling loads through snow that reaches their bellies, fighting wind that terrifies them with its noise and force. Their drivers are desperate. People need to reach destinations. Goods need to be delivered. Money is being lost with every delay. So the horses are pushed beyond their limits, whipped forward when they slow, forced to continue when they should be stabled and resting. It's cruel, but it's also economic reality in a city where time is money and every business depends on horse-drawn transport. The horses begin collapsing in the morning and don't stop. A horse pulling a delivery wagon stumbles, falls to its knees, can't get back up. Its legs are shaking from exhaustion. Its breath comes in ragged gasps. Ice has formed on its coat and in its mane. The driver curses, hits the horse, tries to force it to rise, but the animal is done. It's given everything it has and there's nothing left. Some drivers unhitch their fallen horses and try to continue with reduced teams. Others abandon their wagons entirely and flee on foot. The horses lie where they fell, in the middle of streets, in front of buildings, blocking traffic that isn't moving anyway. Some die quickly. Others suffer for hours, too exhausted to move, slowly freezing as snow buries them. The sheer number of dead and dying horses creates new problems. You're trying to walk through the city, and you have to navigate around frozen horse corpses, their obstacles as solid as boulders coated in ice and snow, impossible to move. In some streets there are dozens of them, a graveyard of transportation infrastructure scattered across a snowy wasteland. It's horrifying and surreal. These animals that were so essential to urban life just hours ago are now just obstacles, casualties of a storm that doesn't distinguish between human and animal. The sight of them, frozen in position of collapse or struggle, is a stark reminder that this isn't just an inconvenience. This is a catastrophe that's killing without discrimination. The practical problem of disposal will haunt the city for weeks. Once the snow melts, there will be hundreds of rotting horse carcasses scattered throughout New York. They'll need to be removed. But how? You can't just shovel a horse into a garbage cart. They weigh half a ton or more each. Special crews will have to be organised, equipment brought in, the bodies hauled to rendering plants or burial sites. The smell will be atrocious. The health hazard will be real. But that's a future problem. Right now, in the middle of the storm, the dead horses are just another element of the nightmare landscape, another piece of evidence that the modern city has been reduced to primitive conditions by 3 days of bad weather. For the horses that survive, their suffering continues. They're stuck wherever they ended up when the storm made travel impossible. Cab horses are trapped outside, still hitched to their vehicles, because their drivers fled and didn't unhitch them. Delivery horses are standing in harness for days, unable to move, unable to lie down, slowly freezing. Some Good Samaritans brave the storm to rescue animals they find, bringing them into sheltered courtyards or even inside buildings. But most horses are on their own, and most don't make it. By the time the storm ends, New York's horse population has been decimated. The economic impact is enormous. Replacing hundreds of horses will cost the city dearly. But the moral impact is worse. These animals served the city faithfully and died miserably because nobody could save them. It's one of those footnotes in disaster history that doesn't get much attention, but which reveals something dark about how quickly civilization abandons its dependence when survival becomes difficult. The snow isn't falling politely and accumulating in neat little layers. It's being sculpted by that murderous wind into drifts that defy belief. Second-story windows are covered. Some drifts reach 15, 20 feet high. Entire houses disappear except for their chimneys. Streets become canyons with walls of snow on either side. You can't dig out from this. You can't climb over it. You're trapped, buried alive in your own city, and all you can do is wait for it to stop and hope you don't run out of food, fuel, or sanity before rescue comes. This is nature's way of saying, remember who's really in charge here. The physics of drift formation are creating a bizarre landscape. Wind doesn't distribute snow evenly. It moves snow from exposed areas to sheltered ones, creating accumulations in specific locations while leaving other spots relatively clear. Buildings act as obstacles that disrupt wind flow. On the windward side, snow is scoured away. On the leeward side, wind turbulence drops its load, creating massive drifts. The result is a city divided into zones of deep and shallow snow with no predictable pattern. One street might be passable with effort. The parallel street one block over might be completely impassable, buried under 15 feet of drift. The drifts are solid. This isn't light, fluffy powder that you can wade through. The wind has compacted the snow, packing it with so much force that it is nearly as solid as ice. You can stand on the surface of these drifts without sinking. You can also break through unexpectedly and find yourself buried up to your chest in consolidated snow that's almost impossible to climb out of. Several people die this way. They step onto what looks like solid snow. It gives way. They fall into a deep hole formed by the drift and they can't extract themselves. They suffocate in snow, their mouths and noses filling with powder, unable to breathe, unable to call for help, dying within sight of rescue that doesn't arrive because nobody knows they're there. Some buildings are completely buried on the ground floor. The entrance doors are behind solid walls of snow. People inside can't get out. People outside can't get in. You look at a building and you can see the second-story windows, but the ground floor has vanished into white. It's like the city has been lifted and placed on a new foundation of snow. For people trapped inside these buried buildings, it's terrifying. The snow blocks windows, reducing light to dim twilight even during the day. The weight of the snow presses against walls, creating stress on structures that weren't designed to bear this kind of load. Everyone's wondering, will the walls hold? Will the building collapse? Will we be crushed or suffocated by the same snow that's trapping us? The street-level geography has completely changed. Streets that existed 3 days ago are now tunnels through snow, assuming they're passable at all. Normal navigation is impossible. Landmarks are buried or hidden. You can't tell where the street ends and the sidewalk begins. You can't tell where buildings are until you run into them. People trying to move through the city are essentially spelunking through a frozen labyrinth, feeling their way forward, hoping they're heading in the right direction, never quite sure what they'll encounter next. It's exhausting and disorienting. Every step is uncertain. Every turn might lead to an impassable drift or a sudden drop where the ground gives way. The sheer volume of snow is incomprehensible. The city has received 21 inches on average, but that average is meaningless because of the drifts. In some areas, the snow is measured in feet, not inches. One estimate suggests that clearing the snow from New York streets will require removing over 24 million cubic feet of snow. That's enough snow to bury Central Park under several feet. That's enough snow to build a wall 10 feet high and 10 feet thick, stretching the length of Manhattan. And it all has to be moved by hand, shovel by shovel, because mechanical snow removal equipment doesn't exist yet. The task is so enormous that even thinking about it is overwhelming. The city is buried, and digging it out will require a labour force measured in thousands working for weeks. This isn't a snow day. This is a snow disaster. Thousands of New Yorkers are currently stuck between destinations. They left home for work and can't reach it. They left work for home and can't get there. They're trapped in the storm, trying to navigate streets that have become impassable mazes of snow and wind. Some take shelter in shops, saloons, hotels, anywhere they can find. Others try to push forward and end up lost, disoriented, and in serious danger of freezing to death within blocks of safety. The visibility is so bad that you can't see your hand in front of your face. Buildings disappear into white nothing. You could walk past your own house and never know it. This is how people die 5 minutes from home. You're somewhere between your house and your destination when you realise you're not going to make it. The snow is too deep. The wind is too strong. You're too cold, too tired, too disoriented to continue. What do? The smart move is to find shelter immediately. Any shelter. A shop, a restaurant, an office building, someone's home. Pride becomes irrelevant when you're in danger of dying. You start trying doors, looking for any entrance that's not blocked by snow, any place that's open or can be opened. Many people find refuge this way, strangers letting strangers into their homes or businesses, because leaving them outside would be murder. The storm breaks down social barriers. You don't care who these people are, they need help and you can provide it. That's enough. But not everyone finds shelter. Some people are too proud to ask for help. Others are too far from any building. Still others try to push on, convinced they can make it. Certain that their destination is just a bit farther ahead. They're wrong, but by the time they realise it, they're too cold and weak to save themselves. Hypothermia is insidious. It doesn't just make you cold, it affects your judgment. As your core temperature drops, your brain function degrades. You start making bad decisions, You think you're fine when you're actually dying. You feel warm even though you're freezing. Some hypothermia victims are found partially undressed, having removed their coats because their confused brains told them they were overheating. It's called paradoxical undressing, and it's a sign of late-stage hypothermia, a final cruel joke the dying brain plays before shutting down completely. The disorientation is total. You're in your own neighbourhood, maybe a neighbourhood you've lived in for years, and you're lost. Everything looks the same, white, featureless, hostile. You turn down what you think is your street and realise it's not. You backtrack, try another direction, realise you're now more lost than before. Panic starts creeping in. You're cold, you're tired, and you don't know where you are. The visibility is maybe 3 feet in any direction. You could be standing next to your own front door and not see it. You stumble forward, hoping to find something recognisable, but recognition is impossible when everything is hidden under snow and obscured by wind-driven white chaos. Some people survive by incredible luck. They stumble into an alley that provides some wind protection. They find a doorway that's slightly recessed and huddle there. They encounter a policeman or good Samaritan who helps them to shelter. But luck isn't evenly distributed, and many don't get lucky. They collapse in snowdrifts and are buried. They freeze in doorways, their bodies not found until days later when the snow melts enough to reveal them. They die within sight of safety that they couldn't reach, couldn't find, couldn't recognize through the storm's white fury. Their last moments are spent cold, exhausted, alone, and probably confused. Their hypothermic brains not quite understanding what's happening as they slip from unconsciousness into death. The people who do make it to shelter aren't in great shape either. They arrive frozen, sometimes with frostbite, always exhausted. Their hosts provide what they can, warm drinks, dry clothes, a place to sit or lie down. But resources are limited. You weren't planning to host a dozen strangers in your home. You don't have enough food, enough blankets, enough fuel to keep everyone warm for multiple days. Still, you do your best because the alternative is sending these people back out into a storm that will kill them. So you share what you have and hope it's enough. Everyone crowds together, strangers becoming temporary family, united by the simple goal of surviving until the storm ends. Some of these temporary refugees will hold for the entire 3 days, creating bonds between people who will remember this shared crisis for the rest of their lives. Others will run out of resources and have to make difficult decisions about who can stay and who has to leave when conditions slightly improve. The few places accepting refugees from the storm are quickly overwhelmed. Saloons, hotels, even police stations are packed with shivering people who've given up trying to reach their destinations. The heat can't keep up with the bodies pressing in. The food runs out quickly. These shelters aren't prepared for hundreds of unexpected guests, because why would they be? This was supposed to be a normal March day. Now they're managing a refugee crisis in the middle of Manhattan. People are sleeping on floors, sharing blankets, eating whatever scraps can be found. It's uncomfortable, undignified, and absolutely necessary if you want to survive the night. The saloons become major shelter hubs almost by default. They're open late, they have heat from stoves, and they have alcohol, which people believe helps with cold even though it actually makes hypothermia worse. But more importantly, saloon owners are practical people who understand that turning away freezing humans is both morally wrong and bad for future business. So they open their doors. Within hours, saloons that normally hold 50 people are packed with 200. There's no space to move. The air is thick with body heat, tobacco smoke, and the smell of wet wool from dozens of snow-covered coats steaming dry. It's not pleasant, but it's warm, and warmth is everything right now. The hotels are in a similar situation, though with slightly better amenities and much higher tensions about who's paying for what. Hotels were designed for paying guests, with reservations, not for storm refugees demanding immediate shelter. Hotel managers are trying to maintain some semblance of normal operations while also dealing with the reality that people are dying outside and need help. Some hotels rise to the occasion admirably, opening their lobbies and dining rooms to anyone who needs shelter, providing food and blankets without worrying about payment. Others are more mercenary, charging exorbitant rates for rooms or for simple space on a lobby floor. These hotels will be remembered poorly when the crisis ends. Public opinion is not kind to those who profit from disaster. Police stations become shelters because they're public buildings with heat and space, and because police are theoretically supposed to help citizens in distress. They're not prepared for this. Police stations are designed to hold officers and prisoners, not to house hundreds of civilians for days. There are no sleeping arrangements, no food stores, no sanitation facilities for these numbers, but people keep arriving, desperate for shelter, and the police can't turn them away, so they improvise. Cells designed for criminals are open to house families. Officers share their own food. Everyone makes do with whatever's available, which isn't much. It's chaos, but it's organised chaos, and importantly, it's warm chaos, which beats being outside. The challenges mount as hours turn into days. The initial warmth from bodies packed together becomes uncomfortable heat combined with poor air quality. Food supplies, which seemed adequate for a few hours, are exhausted by day 2. Sanitation becomes a serious problem when you have hundreds of people sharing facilities designed for dozens. Tensions rise. People are stressed, uncomfortable, worried about loved ones, and trapped in close quarters with strangers. Arguments break out over space, over food distribution, over who deserves help more. Human nature is being tested, and not everyone passes the test with grace. But there are also moments of remarkable humanity. Strangers share their last pieces of bread with hungry children. Families take in people they don't know and treat them like relatives. Wealthy guests at hotels share rooms with working-class refugees without complaint. People sing together to keep spirits up, tell stories to pass the time, organise games for trapped children. The crisis reveals something important about humans. Most people, when faced with genuine emergency, choose cooperation over selfishness. Not everyone, but most. These shelters become temporary communities, diverse groups united by circumstance, learning to coexist because survival requires it. When the storm finally ends and people return to their regular lives, many will remember these days as terrible but also strangely meaningful, a time when social barriers broke down and people helped each other simply because it was the right thing to do. New York in 1888 runs on daily deliveries. Milk, bread, coal, everything comes fresh each day because refrigeration is primitive and storage is limited. The blizzard stops all deliveries completely. Bakeries can't receive flour. Grocers can't receive produce. Coal can't reach homes and businesses. By the second day, people are running out of food and fuel. The wealthy, who usually just send servants to shop daily, are discovering their pantries are embarrassingly bare. The poor, who are already living meal to meal, are facing genuine starvation. Nobody planned for this because nobody thought modern infrastructure could fail this completely. Surprise, it absolutely can. The Victorian household operates on a just-in-time supply system that would make modern logistics managers proud, except it has none of the backup plans. You don't stockpile food because you don't have anywhere to store it. Your icebox is small and ice deliveries happen daily. Your pantry contains staples, flour, sugar, preserved goods, but not enough fresh food for a family to survive multiple days without resupply. You've been trained to rely on daily shopping, daily deliveries, the constant flow of goods that makes urban life possible. When that flow stops, you discover how fragile your food security actually is. It's like having a bank account with no savings, spending your paycheck as it comes in, and then suddenly not getting paid for a week. By the second day, creative meal planning becomes desperate meal planning. That half loaf of stale bread, that's dinner for 4 people. Those wrinkled potatoes in the back of the pantry, those are precious now. That jar of preserves you were saving for a special occasion, this counts as special. You're stretching every ingredient as far as it will go, adding water to soup until it's basically flavoured water, cutting bread so thin you can see through it, rationing so carefully that everyone goes to bed hungry, but hopefully not starving. The mathematics of survival are brutal. You have X amount of food. You have Y number of people. The storm might last Z more days. Solve for how little each person can eat while staying alive. The wealthy aren't immune to this, which is almost satisfying for the poor watching from their tenements. Rich families who employ cooks and have large homes discover that their pantries, designed to hold supplies between shopping trips, not to sustain a household through a siege. Their cooks are improvising meals from ingredients that were supposed to become elaborate dinners, not survival rations. That expensive imported ham was supposed to be the centerpiece of a dinner party, not rationed into tiny portions to make it last 3 days. The fine wines and liquors are still available, which helps with morale but does nothing for actual nutrition. You can't eat money, and you can't send servants out to shop when the shops are unreachable, and the servants would die trying to get there. The poor, who've been hungry before, at least have experience with deprivation. They know how to stretch a meal, how to make soup from scraps, how to quiet children's complaints about empty bellies. But experience doesn't create food from nothing. The tenement families who are already struggling are now in genuine crisis. The children are crying from hunger. The elderly are too weak to move. The working men need calories to generate body heat and have none to spare. Some families pool resources with neighbours, creating communal meals from whatever everyone has left. It's touching and terrible at the same time, people sharing poverty, distributing inadequate food among too many mouths. The psychological toll is wearing. Adults can understand rationing, can accept hunger as temporary, but try explaining to a small child why there's no food when they're used to eating regularly. Try maintaining morale when everyone's cold, hungry and scared. Try making decisions about who gets the last bit of bread. The children who need to grow, the adults who need to maintain body heat, or the elderly who are most vulnerable. There's no good answer. You do your best and feel terrible about it. And all the while you're looking at the snow outside, wondering when it will stop, wondering when deliveries will resume, wondering if your food will last until then. This is what it means to be dependent on complex supply chains that you don't control. When they break, you're helpless, waiting, hoping, slowly starving in a city surrounded by warehouses full of food that you can't reach. Here's something nobody thinks about during disaster planning. Babies. Specifically, babies who need milk. In 1888, if you're not breastfeeding, you're dependent on daily milk deliveries for your infant. The storm stops those deliveries. Mothers are watching their babies cry from hunger, and there's nothing they can do. Some people are melting snow for water to mix with whatever flour or oats they have, creating terrible substitutes. Others are desperately trying to borrow or beg milk from neighbours who might have a little extra. This is one of those moments when you realise that modern convenience has made you incredibly vulnerable. 3 days without milk delivery and infants are starving. That's not progress, that's fragility with a fancy wrapper. The sound of crying babies fills tenement buildings. It's constant, heartbreaking and maddening all at once. The infants don't understand why they're hungry. They just know they are, and they're expressing their distress in the only way they can. Mothers are walking the floors with screaming infants, trying to soothe them, trying to provide comfort when the one thing these babies actually need, milk, isn't available. Some mothers are attempting to nurse even though they've weaned or never produced enough milk to begin with. Desperation makes you try things you know won't work, just because doing nothing feels worse. The substitutes people create are nutritionally terrible and potentially dangerous. Flour mixed with water and a bit of sugar creates a paste that infants will take, but it doesn't provide the fats and proteins that milk does. Oatmeal water is another desperate solution. Boil oats until the water is milky, strain it, try to get the baby to drink it. Some people are using condensed milk if they happen to have a can, mixing it with melted snow because they have no clean water. Others are trying warmed beer or wine, old folk remedies that are terrible ideas but better than watching an infant starve. None of these solutions are good. They're just less bad than the alternative. The social bonds get tested in interesting ways. In some buildings, mothers with milk to spare, either still nursing or with cows or goats if they're lucky enough to have private animals, become heroes, sharing what little extra they have with desperate neighbours. In other places, selfishness wins out. People hoard whatever milk they have, refusing to share even with infants in need because they're worried about their own children. You can't entirely blame them. When resources are scarce, the instinct to protect your own family is powerful. But watching a mother beg for milk for her baby and being refused is one of those moments that reveals character in harsh light. The fathers are feeling helpless in ways that cut deep. Victorian gender roles assign men the role of provider. They're supposed to go out into the world and bring back resources that keep their families fed and safe. But they can't. The storm has taken away their ability to provide. They're trapped in homes with crying babies and desperate wives, and there's nothing they can do. Some men attempt to brave the storm to find milk, visiting neighbours, trying to reach stores that might have supplies. A few make it and return as heroes. Others get lost, injured, or worse. The calculation of risk becomes terrible. Is finding milk worth dying for? How hungry does your child have to be before attempting a potentially fatal journey becomes worthwhile? The wealthy families have a different problem. They typically employ wet nurses for their infants, working-class women who nurse wealthy babies for pay. But many of these wet nurses live elsewhere in the city, travel to work daily, and are now trapped in their own homes. Wealthy mothers who've never nursed are now forced to try, often unsuccessfully, because milk production requires time and isn't something you can just start doing on demand. Some wealthy families send servants on desperate missions to find their wet nurses, offering absurd amounts of money for someone to brave the storm and bring back the woman who can feed their infant. It's a collision of class and biology, revealing that money can't solve every problem, that some things require human bodies and nature's processes, and storms don't care about your social status. Your baby is hungry whether you're rich or poor, and hunger doesn't negotiate based on your bank account. Your home heating in 1888 comes from coal or wood stoves. When the storm hits, coal delivery stops. Within a day, many homes are burning through their reserves. By day 2, people are burning furniture. Day 3, they're burning books, breaking apart wooden chairs, anything combustible. The wealthy can burn longer because they had larger stockpiles, but eventually everyone runs out. You're inside, technically sheltered, but the temperature in your home is dropping toward freezing. You're wearing every piece of clothing you own, huddled under every blanket, and you're still cold. So cold that you can see your breath. So cold that water left in cups freezes overnight. This is what it means to be trapped in a modern city when modern infrastructure fails. The coal cellar, if you have one, becomes the most important room in your house. You go down there and count what's left. Maybe 2 days' worth if you burn conservatively. Maybe 1 day if you try to stay warm. The mathematics are cruel. You can stay warm and run out of fuel quickly, or you can be cold and make the fuel last longer. Either way, you're going to be cold eventually. The decision becomes, do you spend warmth now and hope the storm ends before your fuel does, or do you ration warmth and suffer longer, but potentially survive longer? There's no right answer, just different versions of suffering. The process of burning furniture is both practical and symbolically devastating. That chair you're breaking up for fuel, your grandfather made it. That table you're feeding into the stove, you got married around it. But sentiment doesn't generate heat, and you're watching your children shiver, watching your elderly parents struggle to stay warm, and you make the choice to destroy family heirlooms to create a few more hours of warmth. You start with the least valuable pieces, that rickety chair nobody likes, that side table with the wobbly leg. By day 3, you're eyeing the good furniture, the pieces you thought you'd never sacrifice. Survival strips away attachment to objects pretty quickly when the alternative is freezing to death. The temperature inside your home is now barely above freezing. You've arranged your family in the warmest room, usually the kitchen where the stove is, and closed off the rest of the house to conserve heat. Everyone's wearing multiple layers. Children are wrapped in blankets. The elderly are closest to the stove because they're most vulnerable to cold. Nobody's comfortable. The cold isn't acute enough to be immediately dangerous, but it's wearing, constant, exhausting. Your body is burning calories just to maintain temperature, and you don't have calories to spare because food is also running out. You're tired all the time because being cold is tiring. You sleep poorly because you're cold. You wake up cold. You spend the day cold. It becomes your entire existence. The pipes are freezing inside the walls. You can hear them cracking as water expands into ice. This is expensive damage that will need repair after the storm, but that's a future problem. The immediate problem is that you now don't have running water inside your home. You need to melt snow for water, which requires fuel, which you're running out of. So you're conserving water, using it only for essential drinking and cooking, not washing. Everyone's getting dirty, which is uncomfortable and unhealthy, but there's no choice. You bring in buckets of snow, set them near the stove, wait for them to melt. The water is cold and tastes slightly off, but it's water, and you're grateful for it. Some homes aren't making it. The poorest tenements, with their thin walls and inadequate heating, even in good times, are becoming uninhabitable. Families are abandoning their apartments, seeking shelter with neighbours who have heat, or making dangerous journeys through the storm to find public buildings that might be warmer. Some buildings have their pipes burst, flooding apartments with ice-cold water that then freezes, creating icy conditions inside homes. Some people are trying to seal cracks and gaps with rags and paper, trying to hold in whatever heat they can generate. It's a losing battle. Heat escapes faster than the stove can create it. The only advantage to being inside is that you're protected from the wind, which is the real killer. Without wind, you can survive temperatures well below freezing if you're dressed warmly enough. With wind, you die. So you stay inside, you burn what you can, you layer everything you own, and you wait. You're not comfortable, you're not warm, but you're alive, and that has to be enough. Saloons become major survival hubs during the blizzard, not because they're particularly well stocked or prepared, but because they're open late, they have heat, and most importantly, they have alcohol. Whiskey becomes survival medicine, not because drinking actually warms you up. It doesn't. It just makes you think you're warmer while you actually lose heat faster, but because it makes being trapped in a crowded saloon for 3 days more bearable. Hundreds of people crowd into spaces meant for dozens. They share stories, share food, share body heat, and drink enough to forget they might die if the storm doesn't stop soon. It's deeply uncomfortable and surprisingly effective at keeping people alive. The saloons fill up quickly. By early afternoon on the first day, every saloon in the city is packed beyond capacity. There's no space at the bar. There's no space at the tables. There's barely space to stand. People are sitting on the floor, leaning against walls, standing in corners. The air is thick with tobacco smoke, body odour, wet wool, and the smell of spilled beer. It's not pleasant, but it's warm, and warm is everything right now. The pot-bellied stoves are working overtime, fed with whatever fuel the saloon keeper has, radiating heat that barely reaches the edges of the crowded room but which keeps the core temperature above, freezing. The social dynamics are fascinating. Saloons in 1888 are usually male-dominated spaces. Women who enter saloons are generally assumed to be of questionable virtue. But the storm breaks those social rules. Women with children, families, respectable middle-class people who wouldn't normally be caught dead in a saloon, they're all here now. Class barriers dissolve. That wealthy businessman in the expensive coat is sitting next to the dock worker in patched clothes, and they're sharing whiskey from the same bottle, because status means nothing when you're all refugees from the same storm. It's democracy enforced by disaster. The saloon keepers are in a complicated position. On one hand, having hundreds of unexpected guests is great for business if those guests can pay. On the other hand, many of these people have no money. They stumbled in half frozen and desperate, and they need help, not a sales pitch. Most saloon keepers rise to the occasion. They serve paying customers, sure, but they also provide free drinks to people who are clearly in need, hand out whatever food they have, and allow people to stay without charging for floor space. This isn't pure charity, it's also good business sense. The people you help today will remember it after the storm. They'll become loyal customers. They'll tell others. Generosity during crisis is excellent marketing, even if that's not why you're doing it. The entertainment is improvised and necessary. You can't just have hundreds of people standing in silence for 3 days. Someone starts singing, and others join in. Traditional songs, patriotic songs, bawdy songs that make children cover their ears and women roll their eyes. But it fills the time and lifts spirits. Someone tells a joke, someone else tells a story. A man with a harmonica produces it and starts playing. Dancing is impossible because there's no space, but people sway in place, tapping feet, clapping hands. The energy helps combat the cold and the fear. It turns a crowd of strangers into something resembling a community, at least temporarily. The alcohol consumption is significant. People are drinking to stay warm, or rather, to feel warm. They're drinking to calm nerves. They're drinking because there's nothing else to do, and the saloon has unlimited alcohol but limited food. By the second day, a significant portion of the crowd is drunk or working on it. This creates its own problems. Drunk people are loud, argumentative, and occasionally violent. Fights break out over space, over imagined insults, over nothing at all. The saloon keepers and the more sober patrons work to keep order, breaking up fights before they escalate, moving troublemakers to corners where they can pass out without bothering others. It's chaos management, and it's exhausting. But there's also remarkable humanity. The mothers with infants are given the warmest spots near the stoves. The elderly are provided with chairs when there aren't enough for everyone. People share food with strangers who have none. A businessman buys drinks for a group of workers who can't afford them. A worker gives his coat to a child who's shivering. These small acts of kindness, multiplied across hundreds of people in dozens of saloons, represent something important about human nature. When crisis strips away normal social structures, when everyone's in the same terrible situation, most people choose to help rather than hoard, to share rather than take. Not everyone. There are always selfish people, but enough that these crowded, uncomfortable, alcohol-soaked refugees become places where survival is collective, where strangers become temporary family, where getting through the storm becomes a group project that succeeds because people care more about helping each other than about their own comfort. If you live in one of New York's increasingly popular apartment buildings, you're discovering an interesting fact. Your entire building is now an island. The ground floor is buried under snow. The entrances are blocked. You're trapped inside with your neighbours, many of whom you've never actually spoken to despite living 20 feet apart. Now, you're all stuck together, sharing food, sharing fuel, sharing the growing anxiety that nobody's coming to dig you out. Some buildings organise communal meals using whatever food they can pool together. Others descend into arguments about rationing. This is humanity in a pressure cooker. Sometimes it brings out the best in people. Sometimes it reveals exactly how thin the veneer of civilization really is. The realization that you're trapped hits gradually. First, you notice the snow is deep. Then you notice your entrance door won't open, snow is packed against it from outside. You try other exits, all blocked. The ground floor windows are covered. You're on what's effectively a second-story building now, with the entire first floor buried. Someone tries to dig out, working at the snow, blocking the door with whatever tools they can find. They make progress, creating a tunnel through the drift, but snow keeps filling in the hole as fast as they dig. After hours of effort, they give up. You're not getting out until the snow stops and the city organises digging efforts. You're trapped, and all you can do is wait. The initial neighbourly meeting happens organically. Someone knocks on doors, checking if everyone's okay. People emerge from their apartments, gathering in hallways, sharing information. Who has food? Who has fuel? Who has particular needs, medical issues, infants, elderly people who need extra help? The buildings with strong social bonds handle this well. People already know each other, already have established relationships, and now they just need to organise resources and responsibilities. The buildings without social cohesion struggle. Nobody knows each other. Nobody trusts each other. The discussions about pooling resources become arguments about fairness and who should control shared supplies. The best buildings form committees. Someone takes charge of inventory, going apartment to apartment, counting how much food and fuel each family has, creating a central database of resources. Someone else organises rationing, determining how much everyone needs, how long supplies will last, how to distribute fairly. Another person handles special cases, the elderly woman who can't cook for herself, the family with an infant, the bachelor who has no food because he eats at restaurants. It's logistics and community organising, and it works when people cooperate. The buildings that figure out this system early do well. Everyone eats less than normal, but everyone eats something. The fuel is shared. The vulnerable are protected. The worst buildings descend into chaos. Arguments about who owns what and who deserves resources. Families hoarding their supplies and refusing to share. Accusations of theft when food goes missing. The breakdown of social trust when everyone's scared and hungry. Some people try to be leaders and are rejected by neighbours who don't recognise their authority. Others take advantage of the situation, stealing from communal supplies or bullying weaker neighbours. It's Lord of the Flies in Victorian Manhattan, minus the murders but plus a lot of petty cruelty and selfishness. These buildings will have lasting social damage after the storm ends. The resentments and betrayals will persist, souring relationships between neighbours who have to continue living near each other. The children add complexity. In some buildings, they're the reason everyone works together. Nobody wants to see a child go hungry, so even selfish adults will share for the children's sake. In other buildings, they're sources of conflict. Are children entitled to larger portions because they're growing? Or should everyone get equal shares regardless of age? The parents argue their children need more. The childless adults argue fairness means equal distribution. There's no right answer, just different ethical frameworks colliding in an environment where there isn't enough for everyone. The days blend together in uncomfortable routine. Wake up cold. Gather in communal spaces because they're warmer with everyone's body heat. Eat a small, unsatisfying meal. Talk, play games, tell stories, anything to pass the time. Try to stay warm. Go to sleep cold. Wake up cold again. The monotony is broken only by the ongoing stress of wondering when the storm will end, whether supplies will last, whether anyone knows you're here. Some buildings post signs in upper floor windows. 23 people trapped here need food. Others don't bother because there's no one outside to see the signs anyway. You're isolated, trapped with strangers who are becoming extremely familiar strangers, learning more about your neighbours in 3 days than you did in the previous 3 years. It's intimate in uncomfortable ways, but it's also building bonds that will last. The people who survived, together in Building 45 on 2nd Avenue, will remember this for the rest of their lives. Will have a shared experience that connects them permanently, whether they like each other or not. Those passengers who got trapped on elevated trains when the power failed, they're having an especially terrible time. They're suspended above the street in metal cars with no heat, no food, and no way to get down. Some trains are stuck for over 24 hours. People are freezing, hungry, and increasingly desperate. A few try to climb down and end up falling or getting lost in the storm. Others huddle together for warmth, burning whatever they can find in the train, newspapers, wooden seats, anything. They can see buildings below them, tantalizingly close, but completely unreachable. This is a special kind of torture, being trapped in sight of safety but unable to reach it. The moment the train stops and doesn't restart, there's a period of denial. The passengers assume this is temporary. The power will come back. The train will move. They just need to wait a few minutes. Then minutes become an hour. An hour becomes several hours. The reality sets in. They're not moving. The conductor doesn't know when power will be restored. The cold is becoming serious. The initial annoyance transforms into genuine fear as people realize they're trapped in a metal box with no heat source, suspended 3 stories above a street they can't reach, in the middle of a blizzard that shows no signs of stopping. The temperature inside the train drops rapidly. Metal is an excellent conductor of cold. The walls, the floors, the ceiling, everything is pulling heat from the air and the passengers. Within an hour, the interior temperature matches the exterior. Within 2 hours, it's barely above freezing inside. People are stamping their feet, clapping their hands, doing anything to maintain circulation. The windows are frosting over from the inside. Breath condenses into visible clouds. The lucky passengers who are dressed for extended outdoor exposure, heavy coats, good gloves, thick scarves, are uncomfortable. The unlucky ones who are just commuting to work in regular clothes are in serious danger. The social dynamics shift as danger increases. Initially, Victorian propriety maintains order. People sit in their seats, maintaining respectful distance, suffering in polite silence. But cold breaks down social barriers. People start huddling together for warmth. Strangers press against each other because body heat is survival. Men who wouldn't normally speak to unaccompanied women are now sharing body warmth with them. The wealthy are pressed against the poor. Social class becomes irrelevant when everyone's freezing. Someone suggests burning newspapers for heat. It's dangerous in an enclosed space, but they're desperate. Small fires are started in metal trash cans, fed with newspapers and whatever else is flammable. The heat is minimal, the smoke is choking, but it's better than nothing. The debate about escape becomes intense. Some passengers want to try climbing down. They can see buildings, streets, potential safety below them. Others argue it's too dangerous. The structure is icy. The visibility is terrible. The fall would be fatal. But as hours pass and the cold becomes unbearable, desperation wins out. Several men decide to attempt the climb. They open the train doors, step out onto the tiny platform between cars, and begin descending the iron support structure. It's immediately obvious this was a bad idea. The metal is coated in ice. The wind is savage, threatening to tear them from their handholds. The visibility is nearly zero, but they're committed now, so they descend slowly, carefully, terrified. One man makes it. He reaches the street level, stumbles through the snow, and presumably finds shelter somewhere. His success gives others hope. 2 more attempt the climb. One falls partway down, breaking his leg, and lies in a snowdrift screaming until he loses consciousness. The other freezes while climbing, his hands losing grip, but he's wedged between beams so he doesn't fall. He just hangs there, dead, frozen in position, a grim warning visible to those still on the train. After that, attempts to escape stop. The risk is too high. The passengers settle into grim survival mode, knowing they might die here, hoping rescue will come before they freeze completely. The rescue, when it finally comes, is anticlimactic. The storm breaks on the third day. Workers eventually make it to the stranded trains, bringing ladders and equipment. The passengers are helped down, many suffering from frostbite, all traumatized by the experience. They've spent days trapped in a metal icebox watching some of their fellow passengers die, wondering if they'd be next. The psychological scars will last longer than the physical ones. Many of these survivors will never ride the elevated trains again. Their trust in modern transportation, infrastructure permanently broken by 3 days of being trapped while technology failed them completely. The trains eventually run again, but these passengers remember that modern conveniences can become modern traps, that being suspended above the city in a metal box is fine until it's not, and that safety is an illusion that collapses the moment the power fails. The financial district, that beating heart of American capitalism, is shut down completely. The stock exchange closes. Banks close. Offices are empty. The few workers who made it to their buildings before the worst hit are now trapped there, sleeping on desks, eating whatever was in desk drawers. Important business deals are delayed. Money that should be changing hands sits frozen. The masters of the universe, those powerful businessmen who control so much wealth, are discovering they can't control the weather. Their money can't buy them a way home. Their influence can't clear the streets. They're just as trapped and helpless as the poorest immigrant. It's almost poetic if you're not currently one of them starving in your office. The New York Stock Exchange, that temple of American capitalism, where fortunes are made and lost on paper, is dark and silent. The trading floor, usually filled with shouting brokers and frantic energy, is empty. The telegraph that connects it to other exchanges is dead. The clerks who should be recording transactions aren't here. The whole elaborate machinery of finance has ground to a complete halt. For men who measure their worth by their ability to make money, this is existentially disturbing. Their power comes from moving money, from making deals, from being connected to networks of commerce. All of that requires communication and transportation. Both are gone. They're powerless. And for people accustomed to power, powerlessness is terrifying. The businessmen trapped in their offices are experiencing an enforced retreat they never wanted. Some arrived early on, Monday, before the storm got too bad, planning to get ahead on work. Others refused to leave when the storm worsened, convinced their important work couldn't wait. Now they're stuck in buildings with no heat. The furnaces require coal that isn't being delivered, minimal food, and no way to contact anyone. The offices aren't designed for habitation. There are no beds, no kitchens, no bathing facilities. These men are sleeping under their desks, wrapped in their coats, eating stale crackers and whatever random food was in desk drawers. It's undignified, uncomfortable, and completely unavoidable. The class dynamics are instructive. These are men of power and status, captains of industry, wealthy beyond imagination. But wealth doesn't keep you warm when there's no heat. Status doesn't fill your stomach when there's no food. They're in the same situation as the poorest clerk, except they're handling it worse, because they have no experience with deprivation. The poor know how to stretch a meal, how to stay warm with minimal resources, how to endure discomfort. These wealthy men don't. They're accustomed to comfort, to having servants and staff handle all unpleasant necessities. Now they're on their own, and they're discovering that money is just paper when you can't spend it. that power is an illusion when you're trapped in an office with no way out. Some buildings have janitors or security staff who are trapped when the storm hit. These working-class men suddenly become essential. They know where supplies might be stored. They know how to coax heat from reluctant furnaces. They know how to improvise and make do, skills their wealthy bosses never needed to learn. The power dynamic shifts interestingly. The janitor, who's usually invisible, becomes the most important person in the building. The wealthy lawyer asking him for help has to be polite, even deferential, because the janitor controls access to whatever resources exist. It's a temporary inversion of the social hierarchy, and it's revealing to watch who handles it gracefully and who doesn't. The conversations during these trapped days are probably fascinating, though unrecorded. Men who normally compete are now cooperating because survival requires it. Business rivals are sharing food and warmth. The barriers between firms, between competing interests, break down when everyone's stuck in the same crisis. They tell stories to pass the time. They talk about their families, wondering if wives and children are safe. They make dark jokes about dying in their offices, still at their desks, dedicated to work until the end. The humour is gallows humour, but it helps. They've built their identities around being important, powerful, essential to the functioning of commerce. The stormers reveal that commerce doesn't actually need them. It can stop for 3 days and the world keeps spinning. When they're finally rescued, when the storm ends and they can return home, they'll have stories to tell, but they'll also carry a lesson they didn't want to learn. That power is contingent, that control is an illusion, that nature doesn't negotiate with money. Some will take this lesson to heart, becoming more humble, more aware of their own vulnerability. Others will forget as quickly as possible, returning to their lives of power and privilege, pushing away the memory of being helpless in dark offices, cold and hungry and scared. The financial district will recover. The stock exchange will reopen. Money will flow again. But for 3 days, American capitalism took a forced vacation, and the world didn't end. That's a fact the masters of the universe would prefer not to think about too carefully. The New York Police Department is attempting to maintain order, but they're as trapped as everyone else. Officers can't patrol streets buried under snow. They can't respond to emergencies they can't reach. Some officers get stuck at their stations for the entire storm, sleeping on benches, eating, whatever they can scrounge. Others try to help stranded citizens and end up stranded themselves. Crime doesn't exactly spike. Most criminals are also trapped indoors, but there's an eerie lawlessness to the city. No authority, no patrols, just thousands of trapped people making their own decisions about survival. Mostly people behave well, helping neighbours, sharing resources. But there are exceptions, and without police, those exceptions go unchecked. The police stations become refugee centres almost immediately. People fleeing the storm seek shelter in the closest public building with heat, and police stations fit that description. Within hours, stations designed to hold 12 officers and a few prisoners are packed with hundreds of civilians. The police are trying to maintain some semblance of order, while also dealing with their own problems. They can't patrol, they can't respond to calls, they can't coordinate with other stations because the telegraph is down. They're isolated, overwhelmed, and improvising as best they can. Some stations handle it well, organising the refugees, distributing whatever food and blankets they have. Others struggle, the officers as confused and scared as everyone else. The patrol officers caught in the storm face impossible choices. You're on duty when the blizzard hits. Do you abandon your patrol and seek shelter? Do you try to return to your station? Do you continue attempting to patrol streets that are becoming impassable? There's no good answer. Officers who seek shelter are abandoning their duty. Officers who continue patrolling are putting themselves in mortal danger for increasingly pointless work. There's nothing to patrol when everyone's trapped indoors. Many officers try to help people they encounter, guiding them to shelter, assisting the injured, checking on stranded citizens. This is admirable and it saves lives. But it also means officers end up trapped far from their stations, unable to return, isolated and vulnerable. The crime situation is interesting because it's mostly not happening. The conditions that usually generate crime, opportunity, anonymity, the ability to escape, don't exist during the blizzard. Burglars can't flee crime scenes when streets are impassable. Muggers can't find victims when nobody's outside. The routine crimes that police usually deal with simply don't occur because the circumstances that enable them don't exist. There are exceptions. Domestic violence still happens in trapped households. Some looting occurs when stores are abandoned. Occasional fights break out in crowded shelters. But overall, crime is down dramatically. Not because people are more moral during disasters, but because the logistics of crime require mobility that the storm has eliminated. The lack of police presence reveals something interesting about social order. When there's no visible authority, no patrols, no enforcement mechanism, do people descend into chaos? Mostly no. Most people, during the blizzard, behave decently without police watching. They help neighbours, share resources, organise communal survival efforts. This isn't because humans are naturally good. There are definitely selfish and cruel people taking advantage of the situation, but because most humans are social animals who default to cooperation in crisis. The police aren't what prevent chaos. Chaos is prevented by social bonds, by mutual interest in survival, by the fact that most people would rather help than hurt. The police handle the exceptions, the people who choose selfishness over cooperation, but the exceptions are rarer than you might expect. The officers who survive the storm will have complicated feelings about their experience. On one hand, they failed at their primary job. They couldn't patrol, couldn't respond to emergencies, couldn't maintain order in any traditional sense. On the other hand, many officers did heroic things during the storm, rescuing stranded citizens, sharing their own supplies with refugees, providing leadership in shelters. They weren't police in the formal sense, but they were public servants helping people survive. That's worth something. The department will need to evaluate its response, figure out what went wrong and what went right, develop plans for future disasters. But the fundamental lesson is humbling. When nature strikes hard enough, even police are just people trying to survive, and the thin blue line becomes a scattered group of individuals doing their best in impossible circumstances. The return to normal policing after the storm is gradual. Officers dig out from stations. Patrols resume slowly as streets become passable. The regular work of law enforcement returns. But the memory of those 3 days lingers, the memory of being powerless, of being unable to do your job, of watching the city descend into controlled chaos without any ability to control it. Some officers will be traumatized by the experience, haunted by people they couldn't help, by emergencies they couldn't reach. Others will be strengthened by it, proud of what they did accomplish under impossible conditions. The NYPD will recover, but it will remember the blizzard of 1888 as the time when the city's protectors couldn't protect, when the storm proved stronger than law and order, when survival mattered more than rules, and when the police learned the hard lesson that their authority depends on conditions that nature can simply eliminate. The storm hits everyone, but it doesn't hit everyone equally. The wealthy neighbourhoods have better buildings, more food stockpiles, and more resources. The immigrant neighbourhoods, Irish, Italian, German, Jewish tenements packed with families, are hit hardest. Their buildings are older, colder, more crowded. Their food supplies were already stretched thin. Many were living meal to meal before the storm. Now they're facing genuine starvation. Communities pull together, sharing whatever they have, checking on elderly neighbours, organising communal meals. The strong ethnic networks that help immigrants survive in America are now literally keeping people alive. But even community solidarity has limits when there's simply not enough food or fuel to go around. The tenement buildings are death traps in this weather. They were death traps before the storm, poorly constructed, inadequately heated, overcrowded with families packed into rooms designed for single occupants. The storm makes everything worse. The thin walls do nothing to keep out cold. The minimal heating systems can't keep up. The buildings are so crowded that resources get depleted faster. A wealthy family of 4 might have food for 3 days. A tenement apartment with 10 people living in it runs out of food in 1 day. The mathematics of poverty are brutal. When you start with nothing, you run out faster, and the consequences are more severe. The ethnic communities have advantages that wealth can't buy. They have social bonds, mutual support systems, shared cultural identity that creates strong obligations to help each other. When an Irish family runs out of food, Irish neighbours share even though they are also struggling. When an Italian elderly woman can't stay warm, the Italian family downstairs brings her into their apartment. These aren't legal obligations or contractual arrangements. They're cultural expectations, community bonds that immigrant groups rely on for survival in an often hostile new country. The storm tests these bonds and mostly finds them strong. People give when they have little to give, share when sharing means going without, help when helping is difficult. It's beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. The language barriers create additional problems. Many recent immigrants don't speak English well or at all. When officials or aid workers eventually make it to these neighbourhoods, communication is difficult. Instructions about where to find help, which buildings are offering, shelter, how to access emergency supplies, all of this is communicated in English and misunderstood or missed entirely by people who don't speak the language. The ethnic communities organise their own communication networks, passing information in Italian or German or Yiddish, making sure everyone in the community knows what's happening. It's more efficient than official channels, but it also means these communities are isolated from broader citywide coordination efforts. The children in immigrant neighbourhoods are suffering visibly. Children need more calories relative to their size. They get cold faster. They have less body fat to insulate them, and immigrant families, already poor, can't provide adequate food and warmth. Parents are watching their children cry from hunger and cold and can do nothing. This is different from watching your child be temporarily uncomfortable. This is watching your child suffer genuine deprivation, knowing that their growth might be stunted, their health permanently affected, and being unable to do anything about it. The psychological toll on parents is immense. They came to America for a better life for their children. Now their children are starving in tenements while a blizzard rages outside. The American dream feels like a cruel joke. The community organising is impressive but insufficient. Neighbourhood leaders, often priests, rabbis, or informal community elders, coordinate response efforts. They identify who has resources and who needs them. They organise communal meals where everyone brings whatever food they have, and it's distributed as fairly as possible. They check on the vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, the families with many children. They try to maintain morale with prayers, songs, shared cultural traditions that remind people they're part of a community that will survive this together. It's effective at preventing the absolute worst outcomes. But it can't overcome the fundamental problem. These communities started with too little, and the storm has taken away what little they had. Even perfect organisation can't create food from nothing, can't generate heat without fuel. The mortality rate in these neighbourhoods will be higher than in wealthy areas. Not dramatically higher, most people survive, but measurably higher. The deaths will be concentrated among the most vulnerable: infants, the elderly, the already sick. These deaths often won't be directly attributed to the storm. The official cause will be pneumonia or heart failure or complications from existing illness. But the underlying cause is the storm and the poverty that made survival harder. These are the invisible casualties. The people who died because they didn't have enough food to maintain body heat, enough fuel to stay warm, enough reserves to weather 3 days of deprivation. Their deaths won't make headlines. There'll be statistics in reports compiled months later. But they represent the ugly truth about disasters. They don't affect everyone equally, and the poor always pay a higher price. One of the strangest aspects of the blizzard is the silence. New York is never quiet. There's always noise, horses, trains, people, machinery, the constant hum of urban life. During the storm, all of that stops. The wind howls, yes, but under that is an eerie absence of normal city sounds. No traffic, no trains, no vendors calling their wares, just wind and snow, and the occasional muffled sound of someone trying to dig out. It's unsettling. The city sounds dead. In some ways it is. This is what New York sounds like when it stops being a city and becomes just a collection of trapped people, waiting for nature to stop trying to kill them. The absence of horses is particularly noticeable. On a normal day, the clip-clop of hooves on cobblestones is continuous, the rhythm of the city. That sound is gone. The horses are either dead, trapped in stables, or abandoned. The streets that should echo with traffic are silent, except for wind. If you're outside trying to navigate the storm, the silence is disorienting. You're used to using sound to locate yourself, the particular clatter of a specific intersection, the sound patterns that tell you you're near the market or the train station. All those acoustic landmarks are gone. You're navigating by sight in whiteout conditions where you can't see, and by sound in silence where nothing makes noise except the omnipresent wind that sounds the same everywhere. Inside buildings, the silence is different but equally strange. The building creaks under wind stress. The windows rattle. The walls occasionally emit cracking sounds as timber adjusts to cold and pressure. But human sounds are muted. People are conserving energy, speaking quietly, moving little. In apartment buildings where you usually hear neighbours through thin walls, footsteps above you, conversations next door, children playing, everything is hushed. It's like the entire city is holding its breath, waiting. The silence presses in, makes you aware of every small sound. A cough seems loud. A child crying pierces through the quiet like a knife. You become attuned to sounds that would normally be buried under urban noise, your own breathing, the creak of your chair, the rustle of fabric as you shift position. The contrast with a normal city life is stark. New York in 1888 is loud. Vendors shout their wares, newsboys yell headlines, construction noise is constant, trains create endless rumbling, the L creates metallic screeching, horse hooves and wagon wheels create percussion, street musicians play, children play loudly, dogs bark. It's sensory chaos, the sound of thousands of lives overlapping in dense proximity. That chaos is strangely comforting. It's the sound of life, of activity, of a functioning city. The silence of the storm is the absence of all that, and the absence is deeply unsettling. It makes you feel alone even when you're surrounded by people. It makes the city feel dead even though you know it's just sleeping, forced into hibernation by weather. The psychological impact of the silence is real. Humans are social creatures adapted to live in groups. Part of how we know we're part of a group is through ambient sound, hearing others move and talk and exist around us. The silence removes that constant low-level reassurance. You're trapped with other people, but the silence makes you feel isolated. Your brain, conditioned to constant urban noise, interprets the silence as danger, as wrongness, as a sign that something fundamental has broken. You can't sleep well in the silence. You wake frequently, listening for sounds that aren't there, disturbed by the absence of normal acoustic patterns. When the storm finally ends, the return of sound is gradual and welcome. First, voices as people emerge from buildings, then the sound of shoveling. Thousands of shovels hitting snow, scraping pavements, creating a new kind of urban rhythm. Eventually wagons attempting cleared streets, then trains resuming service, their whistles and rumbles reassuring rather than annoying. The noise builds back slowly until the city sounds like itself again, loud, chaotic, full of life. People who survive the storm will remember many things: the cold, the hunger, the fear. But they'll also remember the silence, that eerie absence of normal city sound that made everything feel wrong, that acoustic void that more than anything else made them understand how completely the storm had shut down their world. The return of noise is the return of normalcy, the acoustic proof that the city has survived, that life continues, that the great machine of urban existence is grinding back into motion. Never again will they complain about city noise. They've learned that silence isn't peaceful, it's terrifying, because silence is what a dead city sounds like. The snow finally stops on March 14th. You've survived. Congratulations. Now comes the truly horrible part: digging out. The city is buried under an average of 21 inches of snow, with drifts up to 20 feet in some places. There's no mechanized snow removal. This will be done by hand. Thousands of men with shovels digging for days, throwing snow onto already enormous piles because there's nowhere else to put it. The dead horses frozen in the streets need to be dealt with. The elevated trains need to be cleared. The telegraph wires need to be restrung. This will take weeks. You're looking at a city that's been knocked back to primitive conditions, and everyone's just standing there wondering where to even start. The first morning of silence, actual silence without wind, is almost jarring. You wake up and realize the howling has stopped. The windows aren't rattling. The building isn't creaking under wind pressure. For a moment, there's relief, joy even. You survived. Your family survived. The worst is over. Then you look outside and the magnitude of the task ahead hits you like a physical blow. The snow is everywhere, mountains of it. The streets have disappeared. Buildings are half buried. The landscape is alien, transformed into a white wasteland that bears no resemblance to the city you knew 3 days ago. People emerge from buildings slowly, cautiously, like survivors of an apocalypse checking if the world still exists. They're wrapped in every piece of clothing they own, moving stiffly because days of cold have made everyone's joints ache. The conversations are subdued. People compare experiences. Where were you trapped? Did everyone in your family make it? Have you heard from your relatives across town? The death toll is unknown, but everyone knows people died. You heard about the man who froze trying to reach his house. Your neighbour's elderly father didn't survive the cold. The family upstairs lost their infant because there was no milk. The statistics will be compiled later, but right now the losses are personal and immediate. The city government is attempting to organise a response, but it's chaos. There's no snow removal plan because nobody anticipated needing one. The equipment that exists, horse-drawn ploughs designed for normal snow, is inadequate for this volume. Many of the horses that would pull the ploughs are dead or too weak to work. The city starts hiring anyone willing to shovel, $1 a day, which is good money for labourers, but barely makes a dent in the actual problem. Thousands of men show up with shovels. They're organised into crews and assigned sections of street. They start digging, and within an hour they realise this is going to take forever. The logistics are overwhelming. Where do you put the snow? The obvious answer is to the side of the street, but when the snow is 20 feet deep in drifts, there is no side of the street. Everything is snow. You can't just shovel it aside, you have to move it somewhere, which means loading it into wagons and hauling it away. But wagons can't move until streets are cleared. It's a circular problem with no good solution. Some crews just start throwing snow onto already enormous piles, creating white mountains in intersections and plazas. Others try to load wagons, then realise the wagons have nowhere to dump their loads because dump sites are also buried. The work is exhausting, endless, and seemingly pointless, because for every shovelful you move, there are 10,000 more waiting. The priorities have to be established quickly. Which streets get cleared first? The main thoroughfares that carry commercial traffic, the routes to hospitals and fire stations, the wealthy neighbourhoods that can afford to pay more for faster service. Every choice means other streets wait longer, other neighbourhoods stay buried longer. The political arguments start immediately, aldermen fighting for their districts, business leaders demanding their streets get priority, ordinary citizens pleading for help that isn't coming fast enough. The city is trying to make rational decisions, but there's no rational way to allocate insufficient resources among overwhelming needs. Everyone thinks their street should be first. Everyone has compelling reasons why their situation is urgent, and everyone's probably right. The human cost of the recovery becomes visible as digging progresses. Bodies are found frozen in snowdrifts, people who almost made it home, who died within sight of safety. The dead horses are everywhere, obstacles that need to be dealt with but which nobody has equipment to move. Some are simply dug around, left in the street until spring thaw makes removal easier. It's grotesque and pragmatic at the same time. The city can't stop to properly handle every casualty when there's so much work to do. So the dead wait, frozen monuments to the storm's power, grim reminders that survival was a matter of luck as much as preparation. The digging continues, slow and steady, thousands of men working in cold that hasn't gotten much warmer, turning over shovelful after shovelful, slowly revealing the city that's been buried, gradually returning New York to something resembling functionality. It will take weeks. Some streets won't be fully cleared until April, but the work begins on March 14th, and it doesn't stop until the job is done. 400 people died during the Great Blizzard. 400. Some froze to death in the streets, lost and disoriented. Some died of heart attacks while trying to dig out. Some died trapped in their homes when fires went out and temperatures dropped. Some simply disappeared, their bodies not found until the snow melted weeks later. Each death is documented, investigated, mourned. Families post notices in newspapers looking for missing loved ones. The city morgue fills beyond capacity. This isn't some faraway disaster. This happened in America's largest city, to people who thought they were safe because they lived in civilization. The randomness of it is terrifying. Survival or death often came down to pure chance, to being on the right street or in the right building at the right moment. The first bodies are found during the initial digging efforts. A shovel strikes something that isn't snow, and workers uncover a frozen corpse, sometimes curled in a position that suggests they were trying to stay warm, sometimes sprawled as if they just collapsed and couldn't get up. Each discovery stops work temporarily. The body needs to be identified if possible, documented, removed to the morgue. The workers stand around awkwardly, looking at this person who was alive 3 days ago and is now a frozen statue, reminded that they could have been the ones who didn't make it. The work resumes with less enthusiasm, everyone a bit more aware of their own mortality. The morgue situation is desperate. The city morgue has capacity for maybe a few dozen bodies. Within days of the storm ending, it has over 100, with more arriving daily. The bodies are frozen solid, which creates strange, practical problems. You can't examine a frozen body properly. You can't do an autopsy when the tissue is hard as stone. The morgue attendants are just stacking bodies like cordwood, waiting for them to thaw enough to process. Meanwhile, families are arriving to identify loved ones, walking through rows of frozen corpses, looking for familiar faces on bodies that are often damaged by frostbite or distorted by the freezing process. It's traumatic for everyone involved. The newspapers fill with death notices and missing persons advertisements. Missing: John Sullivan, age 47, left for work Monday morning, has not been seen since. Last seen wearing brown coat and derby hat. Family desperate for information. These notices are heartbreaking because everyone knows what they probably mean. The person isn't missing, they're dead, buried somewhere in the snow that hasn't been dug through yet, waiting to be found. But families cling to hope, posting notices day after day, describing their missing, relatives in detail, offering rewards for information. The hope is irrational but understandable. Maybe they survived. Maybe they're in a hospital somewhere. Maybe they're injured and confused and can't get home. Maybe. The notices continue for weeks until bodies are found and hope dies officially. The causes of death vary, but most fall into predictable categories. Hypothermia is the biggest killer, people caught outside who couldn't find shelter, people trapped in buildings without heat, people who tried to make journeys they shouldn't have attempted. Heart attacks are second. The physical stress of fighting through snow, of digging out, of dealing with extreme cold is too much for many hearts, especially older ones or ones already weakened by disease. Some people die in accidents, falling while trying to climb down from stuck trains, being struck by falling ice or collapsing structures. A few die from carbon monoxide poisoning, having burned inappropriate materials, indoors for heat without proper ventilation. Each death has a story, a series of decisions and circumstances that led to that particular person dying while others survived. The randomness is what haunts survivors. Why did that person die while you lived? You made similar decisions. You faced similar conditions. The person who froze to death 3 blocks from home might have been stronger than you, better prepared than you, more experienced with winter weather than you. But they died, and you didn't. And there's no satisfying explanation beyond luck. They turned left instead of right. They left 5 minutes earlier or later. They chose a different route. Tiny decisions with fatal consequences. This randomness makes everyone feel vulnerable. If survival was just luck, then you didn't really earn your survival. You're not safe because you're smart or strong or prepared. You're safe because you were lucky, and luck can run out. The memorial services are communal and overwhelming. Churches hold special services for storm victims. Neighborhoods organize collective mourning. The sheer number of dead means traditional individual funerals aren't practical for everyone. Some families bury their dead in mass graves, multiple coffins going into the ground together because the frozen ground makes digging difficult and expensive. It's not the burial anyone would have chosen, but it's what the circumstances allow. The grief is complicated by anger. Anger at the Weather Bureau for not providing better warning. Anger at the city for not being prepared. Anger at employers who encouraged or required people to come to work. Anger at the randomness that killed some and spared others. The mourning is tinged with relief for those who survived and guilt for feeling that relief when so many others lost family members. The 400 official deaths are probably an undercount. Some bodies won't be found until spring. Others might never be found, buried in locations that won't be, excavated or carried away by meltwater when the thaw comes. Some deaths won't be attributed to the storm. The elderly person who died of pneumonia a week later, weakened by 3 days of cold and inadequate nutrition. The infant who died a month later, never recovering from the malnutrition suffered during the storm. The official count captures the immediate, obvious deaths. The full toll is higher, uncounted and uncountable, the invisible casualties of a disaster that reverberated through the city for months, claiming victims long after the snow stopped falling. The blizzard cost New York an estimated $25 million in 1888 money. Adjust for inflation, and you're looking at hundreds of millions in today's terms. Businesses lost days of revenue, shipping stopped, trade halted, goods spoiled, infrastructure needs massive repairs, insurance companies are overwhelmed with claims, the economic ripple effects last for months, some businesses never recover, some families are bankrupted by losses. This is what happens when a major city shuts down for 3 days. The modern economy is fragile in ways nobody really understands until it breaks. You can't just pause commerce for a week and resume where you left off. Everything's connected, and when one piece fails, everything else starts falling apart. The immediate losses are easiest to calculate. 3 days of no business means 3 days of no revenue for every shop, restaurant, office and factory in the city. The number of businesses affected runs into the tens of thousands. For businesses operating on thin margins, which is most of them, 3 days of zero income while fixed costs continue is devastating. Rent is still due. Employees still expect payment even though no work happened. The inventory that spoiled, milk that curdled, produce that froze, goods that were damaged, represents direct losses. Some businesses can absorb these losses, others can't. By April, bankruptcy notices are appearing in newspapers, businesses that survive for years or decades brought down by 3 days of weather. The infrastructure damage is enormous and expensive. The elevated railway system needs extensive repairs, ice damage to tracks, broken equipment, structural repairs where the weight of snow and ice stressed the ironwork. The telegraph system needs to be completely rebuilt in many areas, new poles erected, new wires strung, new equipment installed. The streets themselves have been damaged. Cobblestones heaved by freeze-thaw cycles, paving blocks displaced, surfaces broken up by the weight of snow and the violence of clearing operations. The water system has burst pipes throughout the city, requiring extensive repairs. Every building in the city has some damage: broken windows, damaged roofs, frozen pipes, structural stress from wind and snow load. The repair costs add up faster than anyone can calculate. The shipping disruption has cascading effects beyond New York. Ships that should have arrived during the storm were delayed or diverted. Cargo that should have been loaded wasn't. Goods that should have been distributed sat in warehouses. The backup created by 3 days affects shipping schedules for months afterward as the system tries to work through the backlog. Businesses in other cities that depend on New York trade are affected. International shipping companies dealing with New York lose money on every delayed vessel. The economic impact ripples outward from New York across regional, national, and even international networks. This is what it means to be a hub city. When you stop functioning, everyone connected to you feels the effects. The insurance industry is facing a crisis. Claims are flooding in for property damage, for business interruption, for life insurance on storm victims, for lost cargo, for damaged vehicles and equipment. The total claim value exceeds what many insurance companies can pay. Some companies, particularly smaller ones, will go bankrupt, trying to pay claims. Others will survive but will dramatically raise rates afterward, making insurance more expensive for everyone. The industry learns a lesson. Weather can cause far more damage than they'd calculated. Future insurance policies will have weather-related exclusions or caps. The financial models that assumed certain worst-case scenarios will be revised upward. The storm is teaching the insurance industry that they'd underestimated the risk. The employment effects are brutal and immediate. Businesses that close permanently put workers out of jobs. Businesses that survive but are damaged reduce their workforce to cut costs. The construction and repair boom creates jobs, sure, But those are temporary and often don't pay as well as the lost positions. Families that were financially stable before the storm find themselves struggling. The working poor who were barely making it before are pushed into genuine destitution. The social safety nets of 1888, charities, churches, mutual aid societies are overwhelmed by the number of people needing help. The city's poverty rate increases measurably in the months following the storm. The long-term economic lessons take years to fully understand. New York recovers. Obviously, the city is too important, too central to American commerce to stay down for long. But the recovery reveals vulnerabilities in urban infrastructure that hadn't been obvious before. The dependence on daily deliveries, the fragility of transportation systems, the lack of redundancy in critical infrastructure, the absence of emergency planning, all of these become obvious in retrospect. Some improvements happen. Discussions about moving utilities underground accelerate. Emergency planning becomes a topic of city government. Building codes are revised to account for extreme weather. But mostly, people just rebuild and hope it doesn't happen again. Economic incentives favour returning to normal as quickly as possible, not investing heavily in disaster prevention. The storm taught expensive lessons, but as is typical with humans, the lessons are imperfectly learned and incompletely applied. The next disaster will reveal new vulnerabilities because truly preparing for worst-case scenarios is expensive and humans are optimists who prefer to believe the worst won't happen again. People are angry, really angry. Why wasn't there a better warning? Why wasn't there an emergency plan? Why were so many people allowed to leave for work when the storm was clearly worsening? The Weather Bureau gets crucified in the press for its vague forecast. City officials are attacked for lack of preparation. There are calls for reform, for better emergency systems, for underground utilities that can't be knocked out by storms. This disaster becomes a political crisis, with everyone blaming everyone else. Some changes actually happen. Plans for underground rail lines accelerate, communication systems improve, emergency protocols are developed. But, mostly, people just argue and point fingers while the next disaster waits its turn. The Weather Bureau bears the brunt of public rage. The forecast they issued, rain or snow, is now seen as criminally inadequate. The newspapers run editorials with headlines like, "Meteorological incompetence kills hundreds," and "Weather Bureau failed to warn city." The criticism is somewhat unfair. Meteorology in 1888 is primitive. Forecasting tools are limited, and truly predicting the storm's severity might have been impossible. But the public doesn't care about technical limitations. They care that 400 people died and nobody warned them it was coming. The Weather Bureau's reputation is destroyed. The head of the New York office considers resigning. Congress holds hearings about improving weather forecasting. Some changes result, but fundamentally, weather prediction remains more art than science for decades to come. The city government faces accusations of negligence and incompetence. Why was there no emergency plan? Why were services allowed to collapse completely? Why did it take so long to begin clearing streets? City officials defend themselves by pointing out that storms of this magnitude are unprecedented, that no city in America has comprehensive disaster plans, that they responded as well as could be expected. This defense doesn't satisfy anyone. The public sees bodies frozen in streets, sees infrastructure that failed completely, sees a city that was helpless against weather. Whether or not the city could have done better is almost irrelevant. The perception is that the government failed, and in politics, perception matters more than reality. The political battles about reform are intense and revealing. Everyone agrees something should be done, but there's no agreement about what. Some politicians call for massive infrastructure investment, underground utilities, covered rail systems, and emergency supply depots throughout the city. The price tag is enormous, and taxpayers balk at the cost. Others call for improved coordination between city services, better communication systems, and training for emergency response. This is cheaper but less dramatic, and it doesn't address the fundamental infrastructure vulnerabilities. Still, others argue the storm was an act of God, essentially unpredictable and unpreventable, and that the best response is to rebuild quickly and move on. This position is politically unpopular, but perhaps most honest about the limits of human control over nature. The utility question becomes particularly contentious. The elevated trains and telegraph wires failed catastrophically because they were exposed to weather. The solution seems obvious. Put them underground. But underground construction is expensive, technically difficult, and disruptive to the city. The elevated train companies don't want to pay for it. The city doesn't want to pay for it. Property owners don't want their streets torn up for years, so the debate drags on with everyone acknowledging the problem but nobody willing to pay the solution's cost. Eventually, some utilities do go underground, but it takes decades and multiple additional disasters before the work is completed. The 1888 blizzard starts the conversation but doesn't finish it. The blame game becomes a political sport. Democrats blame Republicans for inadequate city services. Republicans blame Democrats for blocking infrastructure improvements. Reformers blame corrupt machine politicians for prioritizing graft over public safety. The machine politicians blame naive reformers for not understanding how the city actually works. Newspapers take sides, running editorials supporting their preferred political factions while attacking others. The actual causes of the disaster, a storm of unprecedented severity hitting a city with infrastructure not designed for extreme weather, get lost in political theatre. Everyone's more interested in assigning blame than in actually solving problems. Some genuine reforms do emerge from the political chaos. The city establishes its first formal emergency response protocols. The fire and police departments develop coordination plans for major disasters. Building codes are revised to require stronger construction that can handle higher snow loads. Telegraph and telephone companies begin the long process of moving wires underground. The elevated railway system is reinforced and improved. These changes are real and important, but they're also incomplete and come too slowly to help many people. The next major storm won't hit for decades, by which point some improvements will be in place, but others will still be pending, and people will have forgotten enough of the 1888 disaster to be surprised all over again when nature proves itself capable of overwhelming human infrastructure. The political legacy of the blizzard is mixed. Some careers are ended. The Weather Bureau chief resigns in disgrace. Several city officials lose their positions. Businesses that profited from the disaster face public censure. Other careers are made. Politicians who advocate for reform gain support. Engineers who design improved systems become celebrated. Journalists who document the crisis win acclaim. But the fundamental lesson that cities are vulnerable to nature, that modern infrastructure can fail, that disaster preparedness requires expensive investments in systems that hopefully never get used, that lesson is imperfectly learned. Politics favours visible short-term gains over invisible long-term prevention. Building new infrastructure is popular. Maintaining or hardening existing infrastructure is boring. Preparing for disasters that might never come is politically difficult to justify. So the reforms happen, but incompletely, and the city remains vulnerable, just slightly less so than before. The next disaster will reveal the gaps, and then there will be new calls for reform and the cycle will continue, and so the snow melted. Spring came, as it always does, indifferent to human suffering. The streets were cleared, the dead were buried. The telegraph wires were restrung. The trains started running again. Within weeks, New York looked almost normal. The white nightmare reduced to puddles and mud, and stories people told in saloons and parlours. but the city was changed, even if you couldn't see it in the buildings or the streets. 400 people were gone. Thousands more carried scars, frostbitten fingers and toes, memories of hunger and cold, the knowledge of how quickly civilization could collapse. They'd learned something our ancestors knew instinctively, but we've forgotten in our climate-controlled modern world, that we're always just 3 days of bad weather away from primitive survival conditions, that all our technology and progress and confidence means nothing when nature decides to remind us who's actually in charge. The people of 1888 were tougher than we are in some ways. They lived harder lives. They knew cold and hunger and discomfort in ways most of us never will. And still, this storm nearly destroyed them. Still, hundreds died just trying to get home from work. Still, the city, that monument to human achievement and progress, was reduced to scattered islands of trapped, frightened people, hoping the weather would stop trying to kill them. Think about that next time you're annoyed that your train is delayed because of snow. Think about the fact that you can check a weather app that gives you hour-by-hour predictions with reasonable accuracy. Think about how your home stays warm even in the coldest weather, how food is available even during storms, how emergency services can reach you even in terrible conditions. None of that existed in 1888. They were flying blind, dependent on infrastructure that failed them completely, surrounded by luxury and modern conveniences that turned out to be worthless when the weather got bad enough. The survivors of the Great Blizzard went on with their lives, of course. They had no choice. They raised children and worked jobs and built the future. Many of them would live to see automobiles replace horses, to see the elevated trains they'd been trapped in torn down and replaced by subways, to see weather forecasting improve from educated guessing to actual science. They'd see progress, real measurable progress in the systems that had failed them, but they'd also remember. They'd remember being cold and scared and helpless. They'd remember the sound of wind that wouldn't stop. They'd remember neighbours who didn't survive. They'd remember that for 3 days in March 1888, nature showed them exactly how fragile their modern world really was. We haven't changed as much as we think we have. We're still vulnerable. Our infrastructure is still dependent on conditions staying within certain parameters. We still underestimate nature's power. The next disaster, whatever it is, whenever it comes, will reveal vulnerabilities we don't know we have, will overwhelm systems we thought were robust, will kill people who thought they were safe. This isn't pessimism, it's just reality. We live on a planet with weather, with natural forces that don't negotiate or compromise. Sometimes those forces get extreme, and when they do, all our cleverness and technology and confidence gets buried under reality, as surely as New York was buried under 20 feet of snow. But here's the thing that makes this story bearable, the thing that makes it more than just a catalogue of suffering and death. Humans are remarkably resilient. The people of 1888 faced a disaster that would have broken lesser creatures, and they survived. Not all of them, but enough. They survived through cooperation, through sharing what little they had, through helping strangers and looking after the vulnerable, and refusing to give up even when giving up seemed reasonable. The storm revealed the fragility of civilization, sure, but it also revealed the strength of human connection, the power of community, the truth that we're at our best when we're at our worst. So sleep well, wherever you are, whatever time it is. Be grateful for your warm bed and your full stomach and your weather app. Be grateful that you live in a time when blizzards are inconveniences rather than catastrophes, when cold weather means putting on a coat rather than fighting for survival. Be grateful, but also remember that none of this is guaranteed. The weather doesn't care about our conveniences. Nature doesn't respect our infrastructure. And somewhere in our future, there's another storm waiting, another disaster that will test us the way the blizzard of 1888 tested New York. When it comes, and it will come, The only question is whether we'll handle it with the same resilience and humanity that the people of 1888 showed. Whether we'll help each other instead of hoarding, whether we'll share instead of taking, whether we'll remember that we're all in this together, all trapped on the same planet with the same vulnerable bodies, all dependent on each other for survival, when the systems we take for granted fail. The Great Blizzard of 1888 ended over a century ago. The people who survived it are long dead, but their story remains, a reminder of what we're capable of surviving and what it costs to survive it. 400 people died so that we could learn lessons we've mostly forgotten. Maybe, as you drift off to sleep tonight, you can remember them. Remember that they were real people who faced real terror and real cold. Remember that they were stronger than they thought they were, and more vulnerable than they wanted to be. Just like us. Just like everyone who's ever faced a storm and wondered if they'd see the other side. The snow always melts eventually. Spring always comes. The question is whether you'll be there to see it, and whether you'll remember what you learned while you were waiting for winter to end. Sleep well. Stay warm, and be grateful for boring, uneventful weather. Good night.